A seat at the table, involving role of risk management in a corporate setting. So the people on the panel today have the experience of being more into what I would call an executive role, overseeing risk. So they're going to, I'm not sure what everybody's circumstances are here. We'll have a couple of polls and so forth to let you respond to us. But this is kind of how it looks through the eyes of somebody who's in management that is managing a risk function, kind of looking at different parts of the organization, what's required, a little bit of getting a seat at the table, pretty much how you have to work within a partnership. So my people that you're going to see here that are on the panel, I don't think they each need an introduction for the sake of time. We're just going to go ahead and roll into the questions, but you can see Benjamin Cooper here we have with Engelhart, Nishant Mehra, who is with 6-1 Commodities, and Zeev Abramowicz, who is formerly the head of market risk at trading. So everybody's been in a role managing something that's a function to level up to a board risk tolerance. And so I would make sure that you take that and looking at it, seeing that, focusing in on how they do it, what their comments are about being able to execute that efficiently, and how they are looking to the future about how they're going to manage risk in their corporation with regards to all the things we have happening both today and otherwise. So I am going to just start left to right. I'll start with Benjamin. The first question we've got is really pretty much establishing a partnership between your front and middle office. How do you do it?
That's a good question. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is trust. The risk and middle office teams need to show that they understand the market well enough, understand the business well enough, that they can add value, that the desk is going to be spending time constantly teaching. That's really kind of the way you connect with the front office, and that's kind of one of the keys to the connection.
We'll just keep going down the line.
Sure. It's I agree with what Ben said. It takes a strong collaboration between the front office and the risk partners. But to go a step further, it's really reliant on the data that you have, the integrity of the data, being very diligent, showing that your data is constantly clean and cleaned up, and then the formulas that the data feeds actually represent the risk that you have there. And I think over time you could prove that your representation of risk is a representation of the reality of the market moves and the sensitivities, and then all of a sudden there's a strong sense of trust that gets built up with the risk team.
Yeah, I'd add, 100% agreement on all that stuff, right? I mean, we go ahead and we market trust, right? If without trust, there's no reason for office to go ahead and talk to risk. But the other thing I'd add is communication. And so being sort of in regular contact with your trading teams, talking to them about their books and what you're seeing in the market versus what they're seeing, makes that communication just part of the cadence of a trading day. And that makes some of the harder conversations a little bit easier because they know that they're not just hearing from you when things are going badly and that you're that horrible person who everyone wants to avoid and is getting off the desk when they see coming.
So we're going to take a poll here. I can't see the back, who's working this. How do we do the poll here? Can somebody give me an idea? What risk worries you the most? It's not really for you. I was more asking the question of, for the audience, are you a partnership role in your organization is what I was looking for. So treat that as your question and please give me your answers on the poll. I'd like to know from the audience, what is it that you are doing? Okay, so I know who you are and what you do. While you're formulating your comments back, if you have this, and I can see it on the screen in front of us, I'm going to run through everybody again. Give me a couple of special techniques or things that are specific to how you guys do partnering. What's your specialty? How do you do it?
When I think about partnering, we touched on what risk can do. I think a part of it is the organization as well. You need the support from senior management, the CEO, the ownership. It's not possible without that. So you can earn so the risk has to earn the respect of, and you as the head of risk have to earn the respect of the CEO that you know what you're talking about. But if they don't want to listen to you, you're never going to get the respect of the remainder of the organization. So it's a combination of the risk team doing the right thing, but also having the right corporate culture.
I'll take one out of your book. Also, developing the rapport with the traders early on is pretty much how I've worked as much as my career as possible. Establishing that rapport, that builds the trust, and then once the traders have your trust, then you could also work up to senior management. And when everybody has your trust, you're going to have a really effective risk management tool that you can actually base very important information, very important decisions off of.
Yeah, I think for me, it's about going ahead and listening to traders. And so a lot of times I find that risk groups are they're producing content, right, as a way of demonstrating value. But that content is either not useful or it's not laid out in a way that is going to be amenable for, folks to go ahead and base decisions off of it. So going ahead and sort of making sure that when you're producing work product that it has an intended audience and that it meets the needs and expectations of that audience.
So as you can see here on the screen, we've got a little bit of, I'm getting your comments coming back that you've answered. I think it's quite interesting that it keeps popping up that everybody here, like anybody in risk, has a definite interest in liquidity in the market, okay? Do we have it? Can we execute? Can we not execute, right? That's pretty much what we're hearing from everyone here. As well as, you're going into depths here of your data analysis, your personnel, all the different things I think that are associated with the risk culture. So what we're going to continue on here after we've kind of, I think, touched the surface on exactly the partnership that these gentlemen have been able to identify that's important for the risk culture, to looking at how in risk management, what is the need in risk management for capital allocation? And give us a little bit of color, kind of how you manage it and the depth of it, different things that you use to incorporate that within your organization.
So my organization, there's really two levels of capital allocation. There's the risk allocation, the market risk allocation, and the credit risk allocation, which happens at a risk committee level. That's the committee that I chair, and risk really runs the agenda for that discussion. But then we partner very closely with our treasury team, and we have a separate liquidity committee that allocates equity limits and equity allocations out to the business. Risk works incredibly closely with the treasury and liquidity teams. We take all of the stress tests that we run from a market risk perspective and sort of flip them around and think about them from a cash perspective as well and a capital use perspective. And obviously things like asymmetric hedge books that could have very large cash demands if there was a large move in price, are things we give a great deal of care towards, because that's one area that people have gotten in a lot of trouble over the years.
So as much as you're identifying that you've partnered earlier with front office, sounds like in your capacity of setting limits, it requires you to partner with other parties as well. And go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, being able to have each group sort of contribute in a different way is critical.
Okay.
And I think the important point to drive home is we could sit up here and pretend like it's all easy and all pretty, but that's actually very difficult. So you get the traders on board with one thing and then getting treasury on board with another thing. It could be quite the hurdle. And what's good for risk might not be good for treasury, and finding out ways to homogenize those into one problem and then being able to solve that problem. That's really the challenge in it. But I mean, the goal is to keep doing that, to keep providing stresses both on the risk side and the capital side so that you know exactly where you're at under certain conditions when things happen. Especially if you guys are reading the news these days and following the markets, you see it is constant struggle right now to figure out stress says one thing, capital saying another. Where do you go with that?
Yeah, I think my framework is pretty similar to Ben's in the sense that we have a committee that goes ahead and approves risk limits as far as, VAR and drawdowns and all of that good stuff. And then managing that from a treasury perspective is kind of the same thing, that you have to have that relationship on the treasury side to know sort of where the pinch points are, so that you can go ahead and, create the appropriate stress tests and make sure that that's part of your deal evaluation process.
So when you're looking at capital allocation limits, I want to keep this going just for a second. Frequency of turnover for limits, just kind of in general, quarterly, monthly?
Well, we set annual limits as a part of our annual planning process, as part of the business plans that we create. But they're constantly reviewed. So we're meeting weekly on all of these things, and then doing quarterly business reviews to assess and decide if any changes to the business plan are needed.
And so how many ultimate traders are being served under the limits, just in general? 500?
We have about 50 traders.
50 traders?
And about 12 desks.
12 desks.
They kind of roll up to.
Okay.
Yeah, it was about 80 traders, and also 8 to 10 desks is what I'd say. Okay. And allocating at the top of the house and then breaking it down was the next level to it, which happens a lot more often than the top of the house allocations.
Yeah, between traders and originators, probably in the 40s, that are all kind of being allocated from the top of the house down, and then sort of kind of delegated from within their desk heads.
Okay. And so you've got staffs in order to support that. How many people on each one of your staffs, just to give me an idea, give the audience?
Yes. So I have 6 people in market risk and 6 in credit risk, focusing on different regions and different product specialties.
Okay.
It depends what time of the year you're asking me, but anywhere from 3 to 4 on average, I would say, is on my team.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got 3 in market risk and 2 in credit.
Okay. So you can see your ratio is going to be roughly 5 to 1, something like that. It's always been that case. So, I think it's fair to say they'll tell you the technology is everything. So in looking at the capital allocation, and you guys kind of pushed on this a little bit as far as the stress and scenario testing around decision making. Let's go a little bit deeper on that, because if you're incorporating in capital allocation the trade limits for that, that's probably saying to some of the trade people, I have a P&L, I've made money, you're looking at it from a different set of metrics, but how are you using those techniques of scenario and stress testing to your advantage, or the company's advantage, if you will, in the partnership role, to how to allocate that type of capital? What's your techniques of that to do that? Don't switch the batting order here up if you want it.
Taking the first question,
No, you're great.
No.
Get off.
Sure. So we do quite a number of different stress tests, as you can imagine, and that's where we spend a majority of our time and sort of analysis work focused on. We run both historical and scenario-based stresses, and then we incorporate that into sort of all of the decision making that we do, be it setting a risk limit, be it sort of our weekly review of all of our books and the risk we have on the portfolio currently, so sort of the portfolio construction discussion, but then that all feeds into sort of more strategic-oriented decisions as well as we grow the business.
I wouldn't put it at one specific metric or one specific answer. So you have your suite of all the risk products that you have, from VAR to stress VAR to credit to capital allocations, capital stress testing. It's the overall picture as a whole, and I've had certain leadership make certain decisions based on one that they like more than the other. Sometimes it's stress, sometimes it's capital. I wouldn't say there's any one picture that I've ever looked at to say this is the right answer, but if you look at the picture overall as a whole, you could be running really tight VAR and really small drawdowns or anything like that, but your stress could be outsized for whatever reason because there's some tail event from a historical that's causing that, and you want to reassess based on those situations. So you have to tell a trader who's under his VAR limit, hey, we see a problem here, we're considering reduction or making a decision based on that.
Yeah, I think it starts by having a seat at the table for strategy, right? So that you understand what the company's overall objectives are and what its risk profile looks like, and then making recommendations as far as, what are deal structures and deal types that are worth pursuing in sort of concert or in sort of harmony with what that strategic objective is or set of objectives are, right? Like, you can't look at any sort of transaction in isolation, and it's about the sort of how those transactions kind of create your portfolio and the correlations between those transactions that I think drives a lot of that decision making.
So in interpretation of that, I mean, I take it from what you guys are saying is that you're running a daily process with capital allocation that's been either set under a frequency annually or quarterly or monthly, whatever has been changed. But there's also that strategic nature of being able to bring in a new transaction, be it M&A, bring in new tolls, bring in an asset-based thing. How do you treat them similarly and differently? Can you do that? I'll let you take that one, Nishant. I mean, can you do that effectively, and how do you do it? What do you focus on?
Yeah, so for us, it's about sort of identifying what kind of constitutes normal trading activity and what are transactions that are sort of outside those, outside that kind of set of transaction types and sizes that we just consider normal course of business. Things that are sort of outside of that are going to require a higher degree of scrutiny, and that scrutiny is kind of across the organization. So it includes risk opining and credit opining and understanding what the treasury impacts are and what operational impacts there might be, to go ahead and get a holistic picture of what is that transaction and how are we going to manage it as a team. Because at the end of the day, I think that's the key thing, right? That success is a team metric. And so as long as we're all kind of rowing in the same direction, we're going to get to the right answer.
Do y'all hold no Kings events in your offices? I had to say that, sorry. Go ahead.
No comment on that one.
No, oh, go ahead.
No,
What
but
kind of- yeah.
I agree with what Nishant's saying. And the way I think about it is, my job is to understand the risk tolerance and the desired risk profile of ownership and of senior management, and as a part of senior management, be able to help drive that, but then ensure that that's properly deployed across the trading businesses, be it a physical position, be it financial trading, and because there's going to be no limit, no method we could use that's going to fit in every situation. So things sort of need to just kind of make sense. And so I think to do the job well, you need to kind of connect the dots between a real understanding of what is really desired by the ownership and then what's really being deployed.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Understanding where the people that be, or the ownership, or the investors, what they want, the risk profile that they're comfortable with, what they are looking to take risks in, and based on the returns. And based on that whole analysis, I would also agree that there's definitely no one-size-fits-all for any of this. We've tried over the years to make that possible and to have just, this rubric that you fill out and you have a simple answer, but it really comes down to independent analysis on a deal-by-deal basis.
Do you sometimes have to look at it differently, Nishant, when you're looking at it fundamentally versus really what goes into the books and how you're managing every day? That's kind of a separate until it gets into the books. I mean, I know a lot of people run different kinds of models. How do you balance that a little bit?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is thinking about day 2 of your transaction, right?
Yeah.
And day 1,000 of that transaction when you're living with it, and how can market conditions evolve. So to Zip's point around and Ben's point around stress testing, that stuff is incredibly important, right? And the thing that always sticks out in my mind is thinking about signing a solar deal in California in 2005. That's a 20-year deal, and how that deal looks right now in 2025.
Yeah.
The economics that you had on day 1 aren't necessarily economics that you're going to have, as terminal value. So being able to go ahead and sort of think about, and it goes back to the question of liquidity, or the topic that the audience selected, right, as their most important thing, is that our markets through their nature are long dated in terms of the transactions that we're executing, and short term in terms of what the hedging market is going to go ahead and provide you.
But I think that's important, though. I think you identified a key point where, as y'all said, being a partner in the organization and the roles that you have gives you that seat at the table of kind of weighing in on the investment capital of the company, right? As you just said, they're all long dated. I mean, I can just share this. I've got a client down in Texas right now that I'm having to manage, and they're wanting to get down to what I'm going to call the gnat's ass on everything, and you can't. You will never do it. But you can have parallels between looking at an asset base and also a risk base, because you've got to eventually get close to those same numbers where you can run them every day, know what your VAR is, your limits. You can't get down to every solid detail at any one time. And if you do, you know, you're nothing more than just, you know, trying to continually buy a bigger blackboard to take the equation even further. You got to get to the heart of the matter and be able to get that run. And, you know, I don't know this. I know this is a lot of the focus up here for everybody in the Northeast. I'm in the ERCOT market predominantly 24/7 now, and we're having to stay focused more on how people are managing more by the hour or even some case by the minute on some of the assets, because it's a requirement, but it's a requirement of technology, but you can't necessarily tie it out at the end of the day or reconcile to it at the end of the day until you're finished, and you got a whole big different set of numbers that you're having to deal with. And everybody in electricity knows it's a little bit of a monster sometime that you've got to have to take into consideration.
Well, I'll just add to that point, and what you said, day two has become the incredible value add for a risk team. And then if you think about these long-term deals and what could happen from a regulatory environment, I've been studying ERCOT for years, and like, there's one thing I know that I can't predict what's going to happen in Texas these days. So yeah, we were doing these offtake agreements back in the day, and then all of a sudden, 5-10 years later, what they look like and what your capital allocation is going to be required for that, that's extremely hard to put a number on, but that's where risk comes in and tries to add value and shows what these scenarios could actually be like.
Yeah.
You touched on the technology side of it as well, and I think it's worth emphasizing just how important that is. You know, we've done a lot of investment into our market risk systems over the years, and it's completely changed the day-to-day job of every single person on my team. We used to spend the entire day just cranking the wheel of the machine to get the numbers out, and that was made us by the nature of that work, be a reporting function. You had nothing because you had to spend your whole day doing this, like to run this system that was so mediocre that you just couldn't get a number without having some analyst cranking something all day long. And we built a real-time market risk system that could calculate VAR, stress tests, all live. Now I can get it like on my phone and see the VAR, the P&L of our business in real time. Once we got to that point, the paradigm completely flipped for my team and for the work that we did. We're now able to be forward-thinking. It made us much better risk managers. We're able to spend our time thinking about markets, sitting in on research calls, spending that time interacting with the desk and challenging proactively, as opposed to just sitting behind a computer screen all day long.
Yeah, trying to reconcile for every day, you know, trying to do something with the data as opposed to report the data, right? Got it. Where we're at here, I don't know if, I can't see Dave. Where are you, Dave? Do I have polls here that I'm able to run? Because I don't know how the technology works. What do you say?
Just that one?
Just that one? Okay. This is a little, everybody have to excuse me. It's a little fluid here with the technology for me today because I can't see anybody over this thing in the back, in front of me, actually. Moving ahead, we want to talk a little bit about here in the emerging risks that are going to be focused in the years to come, pretty much on the C-suite, people being aware. You know, we've talked a little bit about the strategic nature of a CRO within a company, capital allocation, stress testing techniques. What's on the horizon going forward?
Well, one thing that's really on the top of our minds is the geopolitical risk. I mean, obviously, there's an incredible amount happening at the moment, and it's much easier to look at the fundamental risks of an event than it is to think about the macro risk to global markets. You know, it's much more straightforward puzzle to solve to think about if Russia invades Ukraine, what are wheat prices going to do if we lose exports of wheat out of Ukraine? You can do analysis, you can look at the S&Ds, you can calculate what you think that response will be by market prices, look at historical analogs. There's a lot of things you can do. It's much harder to understand what will the impact be on U.S. natural gas post-Liberation Day. You know, one of the things we saw post-Liberation Day were that correlations between all commodities markets increased dramatically. Some of those days, U.S. nat gas was moving perfectly in lockstep with the S&P. And then it'll stop doing that for a period of time. So there's quite a bit of analysis that we've done, and there's a lot of our research now is focused on quantifying these macro risks and different types of analysis around How do we control that? How do we get better at understanding our portfolio and our exposure to these risks?
So when you think about that being said and all the factors that are going on in the market now, and you've got your stress testing, you've got your mechanics, how often are you having to adjust them now that we've had Liberation Day and thereafter? You don't have to answer that. If you, I mean, give as close of answers you can get. I mean, we're getting things changed every day. You know, how dynamic are you having to be?
It's daily, yeah,
Daily.
constantly. Stress testing is never finished, right? You're always going to be thinking about what can happen, what's new, what are the new problems you're trying to solve for. You know, now obviously we're focused on different things than we were a few months ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, the famous answer is like, we've seen this happen before, therefore, like that doesn't exist anymore. You have to always constantly be looking at this new dynamic and the new shift from where we were volatility, you know, like 2 years ago to the volatility of today. Like some of the things just don't apply anymore, especially with the tariffs, especially with the new trade rules that are coming up, and especially with the geopolitical concerns right now between Russia, Ukraine, and obviously Israel, Palestine.
Yeah, Ben's comment around correlation really resonated with me. That's the thing that keeps me up at night, right? Correlation. And we tend to go ahead and think about it as, you know, sort of this unseen thing, right? Like we have other measures for volatility, we have other measures for, you know, kind of quantifying risk, but correlation tends to be the one that's kind of invisible, that drives a lot of value in our markets. So changes in that correlation structure are really important, and they're the things that you have to go ahead and think about, not even the first order impacts of events, but the second order and third order impacts that are going to impact your correlations.
Dave, what's my time back there? Because I can't see you. Where are you? How much time do we have? 15 minutes. Do we have any questions from the audience? Give me a question here. Somebody give me a question. Yes, sir.
Just a real quick question, and thank you guys for your time, obviously. How do you guys manage the expectations of management with the expectations of your traders? Obviously, they might be coming with riskiest of deals because, you know, they're all incentivized by the reward. However, there's a strategy by management set forth so that the traders don't lose all the money, right? How do you guys manage those expectations?
I don't think there is a real easy answer out there, and I don't want to be too cheesy about this, but the answer is communication. If I had a nickel for every time a trader said to me, but senior management said X to me, and that was completely different interpretation for me, I've had that conversation. I mean, I imagine everybody here has had that conversation more than a dozen times in the past year. The whole idea is you want to be very public with what's expected and what the risk framework is, and then it makes it a lot easier, and you get CEOs to send emails, and you get to put it down in writing. Hey, here's what we're expecting, here's the risk tolerances, and that makes the conversation significantly easier thereon. Just that honesty protocol is really helpful in this stage.
Yeah, it's all about, you know, ultimately the decision's about risk reward. I like to tell people, you know, the traders, that we have the same goal, right? We have the same objective. It's to take good risk-adjusted returns, good risk-reward type trades. But I'll touch back on my point from earlier that I think the corporate culture becomes really important in those types of situations. If the corporate culture is not strong enough where you'll be supported, there's corporate cultures out there where the trader's always going to be right. The CEOs, whoever's in charge, is just going to side with the trader because he's got a good track record and doesn't really want to listen to risk, right? That would be a pretty toxic corporate culture, but it exists out there. Whereas when you have a corporate culture that partners with risk, that understands the value, and wants to hear alternate positions on trades, and wants to have a good process around the risk taking, you know, that will support you to be able to stand up to a trader and know that you're not just going to get ignored.
Yeah, I think it's about strategic alignment, right, between all the sort of stakeholders, and that means everyone from the CEO down to the intern, right, that we're all in agreement on what or at least we all understand, right? We might not all agree, but at least we all understand what the strategic objectives are, and so that everyone's work is kind of oriented towards going ahead and meeting those objectives, and that's from, you know, the commercial side of the house, that the trades and deals that are being worked on are deals that sort of are going to advance that, and that from a risk perspective, that you're focusing on the right kinds of metrics and understanding the types of exposure that is inside and outside the sort of risk tolerance.
I mean, I would say it like this. I do enough outsourced CRO roles. I kind of think of it like church. Everybody needs to be singing out of the same choir book. And when the traders and the risk people and the finance people, kind of like y'all have identified, where senior people are in a forum to where they're discussing things and there's a partnership, none of that's going to happen if you're executing it effectively, because everybody kind of knows what the game is. And you're always going to have the P&L and you're always going to have the risk, but you can at least close the gaps if you've got a common theme that you're actually talking about together between yourselves. Yeah. We have another question back in the back.
Thank you. This is a great panel. Ben Scheinman from Sequant. I'm curious, how many of you use Monte Carlo VAR as opposed to parametric VAR? And if you don't use Monte Carlo VAR, why not?
That's a good question. So we do not use Monte Carlo VAR. We use a historical VAR. We have historically run a parametric, and we do run it for analysis sake, but our official VAR metric is a historical simulation based. We don't run Monte Carlo, essentially because of the complexity of the markets that we're in, the breadth of the different commodities markets that we're in, the access to good implied vols is just not possible across the entire scope of what we do. And lastly, what I like about historical simulation VAR is that it's much more real. You can point back to a historical occurrence and show that that's a realistic VAR number because it's actually happened in the past. We then, of course, the risk of that is always, well, since it's hasn't happened, doesn't mean it can't happen. But we tackle that with our stress testing.
Yeah, same. We use historical VAR. I've always used historical. I've run a little bit of parametric. I've run some Monte Carlo too in parallel to see what the results are. To what Ben said, Monte Carlo is very heavy to run and optimize, even with the advanced technology of today. And I don't find that it gave us more bang for our buck. It wasn't giving us more insight to information, and it wasn't passing back testing any more than historical was. So we rely on historical.
We use parametric as our, predominant and official VAR. I like running Monte Carlo, but you're always tuning your Monte Carlo to what your parametric is going to be. So, but the nice thing about that is that you can go ahead and then get down to the individualized risk factors, right? Like, so if you want to create like a VAR heat map, you can do that in a way that's a lot more efficient. But to both the points the guys made, it's heavy to run, and you're going to spend a lot of time kind of going ahead and making sure that you're very comfortable with the distribution of simulations, because it's tails that are driving it, right?
Hey, sorry, I got the mic, so one question. I think you might know the answer, but what do you guys do when uncorrelated assets become correlated? And if you've seen that, how do you, what's your roadmap for handling that in maybe the short term? Thanks.
So I think you can think of it as, one, when they're not correlated, how do you make sure that you're not going to kind of fall into a correlation trap? And then the second one would be, once they have become correlated, what do you do? There's a few different ways that we tackle that. One, there's quite a bit of math around kind of analyzing the factors behind the underlying exposures that you have on the books, and that does look at correlations across long time periods, and you can kind of tease out some hidden relationships that you might not have known otherwise. So we would do one from a statistical perspective in that way, and then second, we do more scenario based, where we do look at historical correlations, and we do sort of like a pairwise max correlation across our whole our whole breadth of products to understand, like, if correlation converge completely across the board, what would your risk be in that case? And so that would be how we would tackle things when we're not correlated. And then obviously, the other thing we've been talking a lot about lately is quickly identifying once markets are changing, and different flags to understand those correlations increasing quicker than maybe you would realize it just from the P&L or just from sort of the normal course of business?
I don't have much to add to that. I mean, that's pretty much how we do it. We run standard correlations all the time. On a daily, we probably don't evaluate them daily, but we run them often enough to see what's going on, and then we try to tease out what the differences is. Unfortunately, I failed a lot of that, and we've noticed, actually, I had one failure in, I think, January of this year, where we saw, oh, this product all of a sudden jumped to correlation and obviously negatively impacted us. And after that, there was no, like, grand fix for that. We went to see what we missed. I'm not really sure we ever came up with the true answer to that at the end, but so we're just constantly running these things to make sure that we're catching all the ones that we can.
Yeah, I think it starts with understanding your fundamentals and going ahead and trying to go ahead and gauge what's driving supply-demand dynamics and pricing as a consequence of that. And then once you've got that picture, you can go ahead and you can run some stress tests to go ahead and better understand, hey, what does a change in correlation do to my exposure profile?
I mean, typically, I would say that anytime you've got uncorrelated risk within portfolios, you're going to treat the limits a little differently. Is that fair to say? I mean, you're taking a little bit more risk in a different portfolio. If it's a long-dated asset and the company has decided to purchase it for whatever strategy that they're going to employ, you're going to run a model that's going to be effectuating really your long-term capital, like y'all talked about earlier, which is kind of strategic capital. But you tend to take something that's non-correlated and not set it completely to the side, but just kind of have it red flagged as to who's managing uncorrelated risk and for what reason, right? I mean, there's a reason you're doing it.
Well, it's funny because like in conventional portfolio construction, diversification is a good thing, of course, right? You want uncorrelated assets, you want uncorrelated strategies, but then, you know, from a tail perspective, that's exactly where you can get yourself in trouble. So, you know, we watch our what we call basically our diversification ratios, our total drawdown allocated across the whole group divided by the the group level drawdown, and same from a VAR perspective, and you know, think of that as like the leverage that we've allocated across the group.
I mean, sometimes that becomes, would y'all say, a little more of an art than a science?
Yeah, agreed.
You know, that's just the nature of the business that you're going to be in. If you're going to be in the commodity or energy business and have storage, transport, capacity risk, everybody knows how it works. You're eventually going to end up with something uncorrelated, and you just have to accept that risk at your risk committee level and make sure you red flag it enough, and the risk officer is in charge of the the strategies that surround that and monitoring it. We have any other questions? I can't see everybody in the back if you're to my right here, so I can't see.
Glenn. Yep, I have
Yeah, I'm
one
sorry.
first of all, great panel. Thanks for coming. Sebastian Esposito from FIS. I have two questions. The first is, when you're setting your limits, whether it's annually, monthly, quarterly, you know, I assume it's because you want to put funds at risk to generate a certain return. Most of the times we're quick to criticize traders that are breaching limits. What if they're not taking enough risk? And how have your roles transformed in helping the company take the targeted risk so that they are getting that return on equity or that return on assets? And the second question is, how are you looking in this tariff world at potential future exposures of your counterparties, not really knowing yet how they might be affected by certain tariff conditions and the unknowns?
Yeah, so I think that identifying the ideal amount of risk allocation is tricky, right? But I think that part of what we do is we look at the historical usage of traders of VAR, and that we're not going to go ahead and over allocate somebody. Because the last thing I want to do is go ahead and tell someone like, hey, you got to go size up, and then it blows up in the guy's face, and he's like, you told me to do that. So that's a conversation that you have to avoid at all costs. Regarding the question around tariffs, yeah, I mean, look, I think that doing regular, counterparty evaluations as part of your credit process is critical, and part of my credit team's remit is to go ahead and sort of stay abreast of changes in broader market conditions that could adversely impact our key counterparties. But there is an element of understanding that proper credit risk management doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to have any losses, right? That there's a percentage of losses that are to be expected, but quantifying that and understanding sort of what the extent of that can be under a variety of conditions is critical in sort of assessing your do you have the right mix of counterparty risk.
And I'd say to the minimum risk question, that's absolutely a part of what we do. But I would never do it on a trade-by-trade basis, sort of like Nishant's saying. I wouldn't say, well, I think this trade you have a higher conviction, has a better chance than that trade, so we should have more in that trade. Like, that's not my job. But what is my job is to help with the trader analysis that we do and the analytics around our strategies. So we do quite a bit of analysis around the performance of the different strategies that we have, the different businesses that we have. And then that ties into our risk allocation, the capital allocation, and we make decisions around that. Now, if you have a trader or a desk that's chronically underutilizing the VAR that's deployed, the equity limits that are given to them, that's going to become really obvious in these conversations that we have around capital allocation, and that'll get nipped in the bud pretty fast.
I think you capitalize sometimes by, just like they've talked about earlier, having a strategic relationship with the rest of the risk committee, which typically is going to involve the head of trading, right? And you take it up at more the committee level of the performance level of the portfolios. And, if one portfolio that's under the jurisdiction of someone who's in management, you as a risk officer, let them help you tell them to take more risk or take less risk, but it doesn't put you in a kind of a harm's way. That way you can collectively look at what you're doing right. It's kind of like a baseball lineup. You're going to put the better batter up in the front of the box as opposed to somebody that keeps striking out. They're going to find themselves on the bench. I think you have to kind of utilize your relationship as a CRO, as an executive at the table with the other executive type people that are making those decisions and come up with a consensus, because it really helps to build your relationship and partnering that way anyway, of what the data tells you, how the management wants to react, how the risk officer can kind of see it in that capacity, and how much capital should or shouldn't be allocated to that. You don't want to add to any of that? I mean, that's just part of being a partner, pulling the deal down. Any other questions? Like I said, I can't see everybody in the room with this right here. Dave, do we have any other? How are we doing on time? Are we good? One more? Well, good. I'll ask it then, since somebody's going to ask. I like to ask this panel. I always like to set up the risk officer, since I'm not one right now officially. What's the biggest risk that you're most concerned about every day when you leave the office and you're about to finish out your evening that you have to go back tomorrow? What's the biggest risk you think about?
First thing that comes to mind is just the geopolitical risk. Someone blowing up a pipeline somewhere, someone dropping a bomb on something, and it's going to be something we hadn't thought about. We do our best to think of all the different scenarios and places we're exposed, but you can come in one day, it's the nature of commodities markets. You can come in one day and one of your markets could be up 100%, and that's the first thing that comes to mind.
I mean, it's hard to compete with that answer, because that's clearly the top answer right now. There's a lot of war going on right now, which is very unfortunate for the world we're in. But that's definitely the concern. You always have to be wondering what could happen to any one of your individual portfolios, and how aggressively do you want to have them hedge and reduce risk to get there. Maybe from a secondary perspective, we're in a slightly higher volatility situation right now than we have been historically or for much of the recent past, and that could go higher, or that could actually dissipate tomorrow if a deal comes. And then if you're sitting there holding long, if you're naturally long vol, what does that mean for your portfolio overall?
Yeah, I think for me, I said it before, it's correlation, right? It's the thing that's sort of difficult to measure and tends to go ahead and move sort of slowly, and then you look up one day and it's very different, right? Because of generally it's a macro event, or it's some sort of structural shift in the market. And so, yeah, I think that the unpredictable nature of the markets that we trade and their global nature makes those things particularly poignant.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody on the panel. I appreciate the audience and your good questions. Thank you very much.